Ciao and welcome to another episode of Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today we're talking about mechanics and again we're going to be with Dunlop Gaming for the footage in the background. What can I say? There's just enough stuff for it to feel okay to use it for 3 days on the trot. Today we're going to be talking about mechanics. I've left it very late at night to do this. I've got 3 questions. I'm going to try not to ramble. I almost feel like I should say this as a part of the intro every episode. Let's just get stuck in. One thing to mention though, as an update to something I talked about a long time ago on Guild Wars 2 Daily, that then I've kind of went quiet on because it didn't happen as fast as I thought it was going to. A lot of you were asking for a lore summary of the Guild Wars 1 storyline, and I mentioned that I was in the middle of producing a series to do with that. That is 100% true, and I have been working on that. The thing is, it got held up because I'm not an artist, and I had to go to another artist to do like the actual footage for the video, and they put a lot of effort into it, so it took a lot longer than I thought it originally was going to. But anyway, the first part of that series is now I can be like 90% sure it will be out next weekend. So I'm going to start telling you guys about it now on Guild Wars 2 Daily. It will be out starting then, and then I'm hoping to have the other parts of the summary series will be coming out, you know, just a few weeks after that from then on, which should be cool. So yeah, there you go. That will be coming. A lot of people asked and then it didn't happen, so I felt like I had to back up for a minute and just stop talking about it. But now I am talking about it again. It is there. It will be coming out soon enough. Very exciting. But anyway, right, so yeah, the first question came from Druzor, who said, do you think there is a need for different armor values, heavy, medium, and light, when each profession is capable of having a different base number and progression for toughness? Would it be easier to balance if all armor was cosmetic except for the attribute bonuses, and toughness was the only damage-reducing mechanic? That way, a necromancer who focused on toughness could have the same damage mitigation as a warrior who didn't, instead of still having less because of the difference in armor. I think there's a lot to be said for simplifying the way that damage and stuff is done. I mean, they've tried to simplify a hell of a lot with Guild Wars 2, but that's still something that is ridiculously complicated, and it kind of irritates me. With Guild Wars 1, it was terrible as well. If you go onto Guild Wars 1 wiki and search for damage and look at how they actually calculate damage, it is so complicated. There are so many factors and things that come into it. And I do think that there's a lot to be said for just saying, hey, why are we even having armor interfere here? Why don't we simply have toughness? People know what they're getting, and you can easily compare how much durability someone's got by simply having a look at their toughness and comparing it to someone else's toughness. That would be cool, and I quite like that idea. I think, though, one of the main reasons why they didn't end up going for that, though, could be because people are still very much ingrained into the idea that armor should have an impact on how much durability you've got, and at the end of the day they have split the classes into these essentially 3 different camps. You've got the light armor guys, you've got the medium armor, and you've got the heavy armor. I suppose having some kind of gameplay impact, no matter how minimal that is still going to be something people are looking for. I can imagine a lot of people just having that conversation, whether it's really worth very much or not, saying to one another, oh hey, look at all this really hulky looking armor I've got on, I'm wearing heavy armor, why is it giving me no higher armor value than yours is? So I wouldn't mind if they simplified it, but I think really the main reason that they are doing this is just so that, exactly this example you've given here, that a necromancer who's focused on toughness and a warrior's focused on it, let's say they both have the same toughness value, there's still a distinction between them. I think that is fairly important as well. The professions are very distinct, don't get me wrong. The skills, their flavors, a lot about them is very, very distinct, and maybe they don't need this extra little thing that helps to make them feel slightly distinct from one another. Maybe we don't need different armor classes, light, medium, and heavy. Maybe, you know, each profession could just have some armor that seems to suit them, and that would open up the potential for certain classes to, you know, have different armor sets. One armor set for, say, a class could be, say, a very heavy looking set, while they also might have available to them a light armor set, and that'd be quite cool. But obviously that's not happening because they've segmented everyone off. I think it's just in the name of making these things feel distinct, so that it doesn't become as easy to just boil it down to stats like that. Maybe they're trying to dissuade elitist players from looking at stats so much and just trying to say that it's simply a game of numbers rather than a game of skill, and they're maybe trying to obscure that a little bit. But I would still argue that the most elite players anyway in games like this, particularly with MMOs, they figure it all out, and they don't care how obscure or how difficult you make the damage calculation mechanics, how many things you start to introduce to interfere with the damage that's being done. It's still, they'll figure it out. I mean, if you look at, this is really one of the big things that they changed with Guild Wars 2 as well, in the name of simplifying the system, was in Guild Wars 1, another thing that would affect damage was you had lots of different types of damage as well. You wouldn't have just attacks and skills and spells, you'd have all different types of physical damage. You'd have blunt, you'd have slashing, you'd have piercing, and then you'd have loads of different types of elemental magic as well. And depending on what type of damage you're doing, different enemies have different weaknesses to them. And it just really got so obscure in Guild Wars 1, and it really got so complicated in Guild Wars 1, but also at the same time to normal players not important enough to influence your skills. Like for example, when I was playing in Guild Wars 1, if I knew I was going to go to an icy area and there were going to be lots of icy enemies that were weak to fire, that still didn't encourage me to start equipping fire damage. It rarely ever did. There were some situations where some players might have done that, but it really didn't have a big enough impact on the mechanics, so really it was a bit of a worthless thing and they got rid of it. The question is, with this idea with the armor as well as toughness, is that adding enough that really is this distinction between two characters of different classes that have got the same statistic in toughness being distinct? Is that important enough for it to warrant still being there? And I don't know, maybe not. Maybe the idea of having armor without an armor value would be kind of cool. I certainly wouldn't be against it. I think it would be quite an interesting thing to do. Obviously you couldn't remove armor values altogether, because then you do have this idea of a progression through your equipment, right? So you need a reason why you're going to want to buy another set of armor when you're level 20, because you've like outgrown your level 10 stuff. But that doesn't still mean that everyone's armor values can always be the same. A level 20 set of armor could have the same value of armor as an elementalist as it does for a guardian, and that's essentially what we're talking about here. Then obviously not breaking barriers though. They're trying to innovate in as many places as they can with MMOs and break all these barriers, but they're not going to break them for the sake of it. If the system generally works and they don't have a big problem with it, then I imagine that they won't change it. And this is probably just an example of that. It's something that maybe is slightly redundant in the game, but it's in most RPGs. It works in most RPGs. There's no massive problem with it, except that it makes these calculations a bit more obscure and difficult to work out. So they just thought, you know what, let's just leave it the way it is. Let's not change for the sake of change. Let's change for the sake of making the game better and stick at that. The second question is asked by Lulu Mersu, who said, is there going to be any permanent changes or phasing in the world outside of the home instance? It's cool how dynamic events go back and forth, but wouldn't some story twist require new permanent phases like in WoW? Or are they avoiding this because it would separate players into different instances? This is kind of a funny thing. I thought when they were first announced Guild Wars 2 and their systems to try and make permanent changes for the story, I thought you'd have a home instance that reflected permanent changes. So if a building burns down, it stays burnt down. If you save someone's life, they'll be staying around there. I thought you'd have a personal instance, but I also was under the impression that there would be other little instances spread all over the world that you'd walk in around and find, and in these little instances there could also be permanent changes, but that doesn't happen. They didn't do that. It is literally just your home instance. So I do think there's a lot of room in the game for permanent changes to happen elsewhere in the world. I think where they've tried to condense all the permanent stuff into one very small part of the world, and then the rest of the world, even though there are persistent changes, there are no permanent changes anymore anywhere else at all, even slightly. So I think maybe they haven't missed a trick there. It would be nice to have other permanent changes around here and there, just if there were smaller instances around the place, and that's what I expected them to do, but they didn't. So the question is, do we really need that? I think to a degree we do. They have added it in a very small way, in that, you know, you run around the world and you find the scouts, and the scouts you can speak to, and then they'll reveal hearts on the map for you, and they'll give you a little bit of lore about the area. Those scouts will be permanently affected once you've completed the hearts in the area. So say there's a scout that's telling you to help out on 2 different fields. You go to the fields and help them out. If you go back and speak to the scout again, all that lore, all that voice acting that was there in the game is now locked off to you, and he'll just say, oh, thank you for helping us. So that is a permanent change that does exist outside of your personal instance that kind of helps. It makes you feel like you've had a bit of an impact on the area, even though you know that the events are going to cycle through again. That kind of is interesting, and likewise the actual NPCs associated with the hearts as well themselves also will have different dialogue for you once you've completed their heart, and that's another persistent change that will happen, a permanent change that will happen once you've completed it. But I actually don't like that they're doing this. I think it would be better if you actually got to keep that original lore, but they just added an extra thing in. Like with the scouts in particular, they put in a lot of effort to write these lines for them, and they've been voice acted, and you will never get that again. You can have situations where, therefore, you've completed a couple of hearts before ever finding the scout, then you walk over to the scout, you speak to them, and all they're going to say is, oh, thanks very much. And you won't hear anything more. I mean, what if I wanted to know what was going on in the area? I know I've kind of done some stuff and completed the heart, but that doesn't mean I've experienced all of the content. That doesn't mean I've experienced all of the events. I might not have a very good idea of what's actually going on here. I've just been killing stuff. And it's very easy for that to happen. And now you've missed out on that lore as well that's forever locked off for you, because he's just simply thanking you instead of giving you the rundown on the area. And it's a bit disappointing. So that is a permanent thing, but I actually don't agree with. The way the hearts work as well, if it were up to me to add a bit more permanence in the rest of the world outside of the home instance, I think the one thing I would do to improve renown events, the one thing I would do to improve heart quests, is all these other side stuff, things that you can do to gain progress for a heart quest that isn't to do with combat. So for example, you're at a scrapyard, you're a child, you're at a scrapyard, and you can get progress in the renown event by picking up scraps and putting them into their various places that they belong. I think that you could improve all renown events, because most of them have got stuff like that, side stuff to do, if those were persistent changes. So for example, in Beetleton, you can find there's loads of centaur graffiti on the walls in a lot of the buildings. So you can then go there and rub the graffiti off of the building and get a little bit of progress for your renown heart, right? But then after a little while, that will respawn on there. It will just pop back up out of nowhere. And that's the same for everything. Different bits of scrap that are on the floor, stuff that's broken, it will all just re-break or become messy again for you to pick back up. And what I think would be interesting, and they're doing that so that you can continuously do the same thing and it doesn't become a chore to complete the renown events. But I think what would be nice if that was permanent. You rub that graffiti off and that's gone forever. And the way to actually complete the heart is you have to find like 90% of all of the graffiti, or you have to speak to 90% of the children or whatever, and once you've done that, that is a permanent change, because then it really does feel like you've had an impact. I had a situation in the beta where I was in a renown event where I was helping out some people on a highway in Queensdale. Now, you could complete the renown event very easily because it spread over a very long way. You could just walk along this highway and get loads of things, but I didn't realise this. So at the time, I was in this small little outpost, and you could pick up these papers that were in these little bins and just like neaten them up and kill rats that were in the area. And it was a very small little outpost, this area that I was in, and I was under the impression this was the only place you could complete the renown event on. So I ran around, killed all the rats, and cleaned up all of the bins of paper, but I was only like an eighth of the way through the renown heart, and I thought, right, well now what do I do? And I was actually encouraged to just wait there, wait for this paper to magically shuffle itself up again so I could go and clean that. And that doesn't make any sense. You're not making a permanent impact, especially if you are literally waiting for these things to respawn into a situation where you can clean them up again. That is the worst possible thing you can do. That's worse than gameplay we had in Guild Wars 1, and Guild Wars 2 is trying to take away this kind of grindy experience where you're waiting on things to respawn. So yeah, I think that renown hearts could be improved very much. Once you clean that paper up, that is cleaned 100% for your account, full stop. And there will be a bit of phasing, I suppose, there, but that's happening in the system anyway as we speak. Going back to the centaur graffiti example, if I'm playing with you, I rub the graffiti off of the wall, you will still see the graffiti there even though I've rubbed it off. Even though it's going to respawn for me later, you still see the graffiti there. So that weird dislodge there is still there anyway. So why not just have this all as permanent stuff and actually have the renown events require you to go and clean up certain things? I think that would make the renown hearts a lot more fun and make me feel like I've had a lot more impact on the area. So yeah, I think the game could do with more permanent changes outside of the home instance, because I think that it's all just a little bit localized at the moment, and I think just that one change to a renown event and expecting people to find stuff like that could be a really positive change to the game. I really do. I can see why ArenaNet have gone with this respawning system as they have right now, because they don't want someone to be trying to find a needle in the haystack. There's 50 bits of graffiti, let's say, in Beetleton. You found 49 of them, but you can't find the 50th, and you're not going to be able to complete the heart until you found the 50th, and it's really, really annoying. But they can obviously avoid that by simply saying, right, there's 50 bits of graffiti in Beetleton, you only need to find 40 to finish the renown heart, and you can find those other 10 if you want, and that will be that. That would be cool. I can't see any reason why they couldn't go with that in the end. But as renown hearts are at the moment anyway, they're certainly a good system. I just think this would be a nice way to add more permanence and help players feel like they're having an impact instead of waiting around for rats to respawn, which is literally the epitome of what we don't want to see in MMOs. So yeah, anyway, there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Dailies for today complete. Thanks very much for watching. Just to clarify to you all, I have got next week, as we're doing it, Guild Wars 2 Daily we'll be considering just like normal, but over the weekend, I've started recording a new Let's Play of Tomb Raider Underworld. That will be going up. Don't be scared if you're just a Guild Wars guy, though. That doesn't mean that the channel is no longer Guild Wars 2. It will still be Guild Wars 2 Daily stuff going up, and I still do have plans for other stuff for Guild Wars 2, such as the timeline stuff, in addition to the summary series, which, like I say, maybe next week should be... I'm pretty confident it will be ready to go, part 1 of that for next week. So yeah, there you go, guys. Thanks very much, and I'll see you tomorrow.